First of all, I just want to say thanks to the organisers of HUSTEF, to Attila, Schiller, Tibor, and the other folks behind the scenes for inviting us here and giving me a bit of floor time and airtime to talk to you guys today. It's a privilege to do that. I've been in Hungary now for 24 hours and managed to find a bit of time yesterday afternoon to walk up and down the Danube, look at some sites, have some food, marvel at the architecture, be fascinated by the bridges, and generally get an opinion that I think those of you who live in Hungary live in a beautiful city, so well done. The one thing I haven't quite got my head around just yet is the idea of the chimney cake. I think they're very interesting. I tried one yesterday, and I'm on a bit of a diet, and I researched it earlier, and the average chimney cake has got 1,648 calories in it. Because I want to make you feel bad. Okay, so if you're going to try those chimney cakes, they're well worth a go, but maybe share them among your friends, because you'll regret it. You may go home in an ambulance. So, without any further ado, Attila and I were discussing what I could talk about today that was going to be of interest to maybe people at different levels of their testing career, and maybe a topic which wasn't technical in nature, because there's going to be plenty of opportunity over the next couple of days to immerse yourself in technology and technical topics. And to be honest with you, I'm so far away from the technical side of testing these days, it wouldn't make sense if I tried to talk about anything else. So we thought it'd be good if I talked about stakeholders. And it's a bit of a topic I think that people in testing need to understand at some point in their career, because at some point in your life you're going to need to face up to stakeholders and demonstrate the value that you bring to them or the organisation that you work for. So we thought we'd talk about these guys. And I wanted to cover today in the next kind of 20 minutes or so, first of all, the importance of stakeholders, the problems of perception, so when they don't know what you're doing, what it means to you when they start to invent their own narrative about what you're doing for them. I wanted to talk about identification of stakeholders and how we should communicate to them and with them, and spend a bit of time really exploring what we need to talk to them about. And once we've gone through that really boring stuff, I want to have a story or share a story with you about heartbreak and broken relationships. It tugs at the heartstrings. And then there's going to be a bit of time for Q&A at the end. So if you've got questions as we go, you can ask them, but I prefer if you left them to the end so we can keep to time and give Alex the floor in about half an hour. So before I really get started, I just want to see if anybody in the audience can tell me why we need stakeholders as testing folk. Is anybody going to put their hand up and I'll volunteer an answer? Alex.
Because I was literally in a conversation this afternoon about one that I'd missed out with my latest project. Because they have opinions. And they're going to use what we're doing.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, we need stakeholders because they have opinions and they're going to use what we do. So they are, our end users to some extent, and we test on their behalf. Has anybody else got any other opinions about why we think stakeholders are important to us? Jennifer, the lovely Jennifer.
Because unless we listen to them, we're not going to give them the product that they're looking for.
Brilliant, thank you. So yeah, just to kind of paraphrase a few points, but my clicker's broken. No, it's not. It's just slow. Without stakeholders, we don't have a mandate or the permission to do testing. We need them because they give us the... I'm going to need to change this. Hang on. Yeah, we exist because of our stakeholders. They often own the risks that we mitigate or assess through our work, product risks and project risks. And they often provide us with the budgets and the environments and the people or the suppliers or the tools that we need to do our work. So without stakeholders, we don't actually have any remit to do testing. The thing is as we uncover product risks and project risks for our stakeholders, we start to become a conduit of information, a highway of information to our various stakeholder groups, or we should be. And we become a hub of information to many different stakeholder groups. So for me, testing is an information business. It's also a people business because we actually make stakeholders aware of risks and mitigation and the situation of quality of software so that they can make informed decisions about releases, for example. So it makes us a people and communication business too. I think the challenge is that our industry tends to focus correctly on technical skills. We get very hung up on architecture or networks, or we immerse ourselves in things like service virtualization or how to do API testing, or we talk a lot about defects. And those things are good, but at some point, all of us need to start to be able to talk to our stakeholders about what we do, why we do it, how it benefits them, and what the value is they get from us. And so we need to start to focus sometimes on social and communication skills too. And if we don't do that, then perceptions can become a problem. And that's where stakeholders don't get the information they need from you, so they start to build up their own internal narrative about what you are doing or what you're not doing. And sometimes that's a negative message that they start to tell themselves. And I love this quote from Bill Gates. It was from 2015. He says, "Your intentions don't matter, but perceptions are reality. If people perceive you the wrong way, it doesn't matter what your intentions are." And what that really means is you can be doing the best testing possible, with the best intentions possible, and actually doing a really good job. But if your stakeholders are not aware of what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it, how it benefits them, they may think differently. And if you get to that sort of situation where your stakeholders have got a negative perception of you, it's really quite damaging. And I put this list together because this is what I experienced in the past when I took over testing teams in 2 or 3 different organizations over the last few years. So if your stakeholders have got negative perceptions of what you're doing or your teams are doing, then it starts to erode trust and respect between the stakeholders and the people that do testing. And that doesn't matter whether it's happening in product teams, whether it's happening with agile or traditional waterfall testing. The same challenge persists. If your stakeholders don't know what you're doing and how you help them, they may have a negative perception about you. And when this trust is eroded and the respect starts to deteriorate, the first thing that happens is that it introduces additional work. You often have got to qualify what you're doing. You have to be involved in more reviews, quality reviews. Maybe the audit team get involved and want you to explain what you're doing and why you're doing it. You may be asked to produce more detailed estimates every time you pitch for work. That takes further time. And there's additional overheads and governance that the test leads and test managers need to be involved in. And that sort of rectification work really starts to erode the time that the team have to do the delivery work. So either the testing itself gets squeezed to accommodate the additional needs of information flow to the stakeholders, or you have to do both. And people end up working much longer hours than is needed because we didn't get off on the right foot with our stakeholders. And the other thing that can happen, and I've seen this in a couple of organizations, that funding can become a problem. If your stakeholders are not convinced you're doing a good job for them, they're less likely in the next commercial or financial year to put the budgets forward for testing that you maybe need, or your team leaders or your managers need. Because they say, well, it isn't very good at the moment, why do we put more money into it to try to make it better? We're not seeing any improvement here, so therefore we're less likely to invest. That in itself is really bad, because sometimes that means people don't get pay rises, they maybe don't get the tools they need to do the work in the most effective way, and it impacts the team spirit and morale. People can start to leave your organisation, it makes your testing function less capable, and you start on a bit of a slippery cycle of trying to bring people into an organisation where, frankly, testing isn't seen as valuable but valid, and it's a bit of a negative place to work. It really impacts on morale. And the worst thing you can get to in any organisation is where the testing's reputation is based on subjectivity and opinion and not on fact. And so the rest of this talk is really explaining what you can do about that to prevent that from happening so you don't get into this kind of position. Does this make sense, by the way? Am I talking too quickly, or is this about right? Is it okay? I'm getting thumbs from the back. Thank you. Thank you. So often you'll find smoke signals. You'll get some early warning sensories about what's going on in the organisation. So if your stakeholders come directly to you, or if your test manager or your head of development or whoever starts to ask you questions about what value does this work you're doing bring to the organisation, or if they ask, why is the cost of this piece of testing so high? Or if they say, is there not a more efficient way of doing this? Why are we having to take this approach that takes this much time? Or if they ask about the effectiveness, are you actually doing the right things that protect our interests? You know that somebody in the organisation has got some negative perceptions about what you're doing. That can be one of three reasons. Maybe they've got negative perceptions about what you're doing and actually everything is okay. It may be that your stakeholders have really picked up on a deficiency and you've got to do something about it. In my opinion, certainly in larger organisations, it's normally a combination of the two. So if you get into that situation, you need to start to think about who owns that conversation with the stakeholders. And this is quite important because sometimes your stakeholders are talking directly to you and sometimes they're talking indirectly to you through your development manager or through your CIO or through your program director. And the challenge can be is that when you start to send information indirectly through to stakeholder groups, the information can get changed or the inference of the detail gets lost or is made ambiguous. And I'm interested if anybody else has seen this in the past, but I do recall an instance where testing was doing a really good job. They were finding a lot of defects, in fact, more defects than the program director thought there would be. The program director didn't have enough developers on the team to actually fix them and continue to get to code complete. So the report that went up is that testing is blocking development. And the program manager was defending his position. He had his own agenda he was looking to advance, and he didn't want to admit that he had actually got the resourcing wrong with the development supplier to actually keep the development machine running at full capacity in order to complete on time. So the information was not incorrectly sent to the stakeholders, but it was massaged in a way that laid the blame at testing's door. So it's very valuable to try to make sure you've got direct one-to-one communication with your stakeholder groups, maybe at different levels in the organisation. So if you've got your C-suite, maybe it's your test managers or your head of testing that needs to own that relationship. But sometimes with people like product owners or with agile coaches or with the developers, you can own those conversations. But within your teams and within your structures, you've got to make sure that your communications are direct with your stakeholders so they get the information that you intend to give them in a factual and correct way. Does that make sense? I saw Fiona smiling as if that resonated. Of course. Okay, well, maybe in the Q&A we can come to that and explore it a bit further. Yeah? Okay, great. So, excuse me. So, what is the answer? How do we get on top of this potential problem and move to a position where we can prevent this from happening as opposed to responding to it through firefighting? And this is pretty much 101 stuff, but it's about doing a stakeholder mapping exercise. What you have to do is work out for yourselves, who are your stakeholders, first of all? And it's quite helpful to group them by either technology stakeholders, operational stakeholders, business stakeholders, or governance. And on this matrix, what I like to do is to plot one axis that shows the level of risk that those stakeholders have if testing doesn't achieve its objectives. And another one is the level of exposure. Who is accountable for certain risks if things go wrong? And what that gives you is a plot. This is an example. It'll be different in every organisation, and it'll be different even at a project level within organisations, depending on the context of the work you're doing. So this is an illustration. It's not something you can take away and copy, because I've just made it up. But when you do this sort of mapping into a matrix, you can look at the guys up here in the top right-hand corner, and these are the folks that have got the highest risk if things go wrong and the greatest level of exposure. So these are the people that we need to talk to frequently. We need to be making sure we keep them appraised of anything that's happening that may cause a problem, so there's no sudden surprises for them. And we need to make sure we give them information of value that's very helpful for them, that enables them to make the right decisions. The rest of the guys here we care about as well. We just maybe don't talk to them as frequently and we don't, engage as regularly. But we still need to make sure that we do periodic reviews to see if people's interests are shifting in this grid. because that does happen too, especially on longer programs of work that may be a year or 18 months in duration. Even if you're running in agile teams and you've got product teams and you're doing regular releases and continuous delivery, the interest levels of these groups will still change on that program depending where it is in the overall business life cycle. So it's a good thing to do this mapping. So that in and of itself is quite a good starting point. But before I go any further, I just wanted to bring a couple of value statements for you to think about. And it's good to see Paul at the back, Paul Gerard. This first value statement I've nicked out of his Tester's Pockets book that was published in 2009. And what Paul says here is that the value of testing is measured by the confidence of stakeholder decision making. So if your stakeholders are confident they've got the right information to make good informed decisions, then the value of testing is high. And if we believe that to be true, then it logically follows that stakeholder confidence is directly related to the quality and the value of the information that testing provides to those stakeholders. So when we know that and we think about those two statements, what is it that we need to talk to our stakeholders about? What does quality and valuable information look like? So this next grid, I hope you can see it. There's a lot in there. And again, this is made up. But there's a certain amount of truth and science in here based on the stakeholders that I've engaged with. But if we think about what product owners or managers want, they're interested in value for money if they are budget holders. We need to be able to express the work we do in value for money terms. That's a separate topic in itself that I'm happy to talk about with people afterwards if we want to understand how to actually articulate value for money. But in addition, they need to know about test effectiveness. Are we delivering on our outcomes that protect their interests and reduce their risks? They want to know about feedback loops. How quickly are we able to provide feedback to development teams on the quality of the development that have been made and any product risks? They need to know about defects. Other stakeholders, for example, here we've got finance, supplier management and procurement. They're interested in cost. They're interested in value for money. There's a lot of repetition about what stakeholders need from testing. But equally, they want to know about customer satisfaction. They are quite interested in understanding service definition and measures and supplier performance. So if you're a test lead or a test manager and you've got some suppliers doing testing for you, procurement and customer supplier relationship managers in your organisation need information from you so they can manage those relationships on your behalf. So again, we get the right value for money, maybe get rebates if suppliers aren't performing well. But they need the right data and they need the right information to do that. And other things like this C-suite, the CIO, the CEO, the CFO, the CTO, they own a lot of risks on a risk register. So understanding what risks that they carry and how you can help mitigate that is important, and you can talk about those risks from a mitigation point of view based on the testing you're doing for them. CTOs are interested in technical adoption of new platforms and new technologies. The CISO may be interested in security and vulnerabilities and how secure hardware is or applications are. So when you think about the stakeholders and do the mapping, you then need to actually talk to them to find out what it is they need from you so you can work out what the information is that they need, how to represent it, what sort of metrics they're going to need, how quantitative it is, and how frequently you need to talk to them. And if we do that, we can get off on the right foot on any piece of work with our stakeholders and make sure we're providing that information in a format that they need. So this is the Heartbreak Story. And if I had more time, I'd have put some very sad, weepy music with violins on it to, ham it up a bit. But this is a true story. I worked for the Financial Conduct Authority for 5 years. And I joined them as a head of testing back in, I think it was about 2015. Yeah, it was 2015. And I was brought in because testing was a bit broken in that organisation and they needed to have it fixed. So there were lots of things that were wrong. So what I did first of all in my first month was walk around and do the stakeholder mapping and talk to the stakeholders and find out what they thought of testing. Find out how we were doing. Were they delighted with us? Were they happy with us? Or were they severely pissed off? And do you know what? Tech ops, the guys that look after operational software, they hated us. They thought, and I'm not joking, they thought we were incompetent. They thought we were uncaring, and they accused us of working in isolation. And those were, I think, in my, relatively long career, the hardest conversations I've had. There's a lot of emotion in the room, and people got very angry. Operations folk took the responsibility of operational service and availability and reliability incredibly seriously. And if there were production issues, they absolutely blamed us. So there was a bit of a turnaround that we needed to do. Now, what I'm going to show you next is a bit more about the perception that I talked about, the reality, and maybe what the reasons were. So if I go into this little table here, we can see that, up here, they thought we were incompetent. The reality was we were highly effective. We were finding a lot of defects before production, and there were very, very few production issues. But the reason they thought we were incompetent is because there was a lack of visibility and a lack of data that was being used to tell a story to them about how good we were at testing. So we were negligent. We weren't looking after our stakeholder and giving them the information that they needed. The next perception was that we did exhaustive testing. We were the financial, or they are, the financial services authority. They're the regulator. Our systems were meant to be bulletproof in their mind. But the reality is, as with all testers, we work with financial constraints, technical constraints, time constraints, and we can't do exhaustive testing. And the reason that this perception existed was a lack of awareness of our approaches and the rationale behind our approaches. They expected defect-free software. We took a risk-based approach, knowing there may be some leakage. And the issue was here, there's a differing risk appetite. They wanted 100% defect-free software. We wanted to get the job done with the best coverage and the best outcome, given the time and the budgets and the people available. And the last one here about being uncaring couldn't have been further from the truth. We had strong, professional, highly competent and highly skilled testers who took an enormous amount of pride in their work. And so you can imagine that hearing this from our stakeholders was demoralizing for them because they knew they were doing a good job. The reason they thought this and had this perception was isolated working, and you know what? They were right. We were busy in our own little kingdom, beavering away, writing tests, running tests, raising defects, getting them fixed, and saying to them, here, you can put this live now. And they weren't aware of the approaches and the strategies and the constraints that we were working under. So before I talk about what we did about the rest, what we did to kind of fix the lack of awareness of approaches and also fix this idea of isolated working is that we invited our service delivery managers from the operations team into the test assurance meetings that we had. So at the time I had 5 different suppliers doing testing for us, primarily offshore. We had about 250 people in the team doing work, but we had onshore test managers from those suppliers who came to us once a week and explained what they were doing, and we could validate that they were following the right processes, we could support them with any challenges they're having, help remove blockers for them, and actually provide a level of support and coaching so that we would get our outcomes we needed from our suppliers. So we brought the operations guys into those meetings so they could hear the conversations, they could understand the approaches we were using, and importantly, if they had any concerns or any challenges, they could ask them before it was too late. And that gave them an opportunity to be involved, and it really started to fix part of the problem about feeling isolated, not engaged with us. The incompetence and the risk appetite we fixed through using data. Now, this is going to be quite simple in principle, and you think, well, so what? But it's amazing how many people don't do what we did. So, how many of you here in the room track your defect leakage? How many people know how many defects you find in testing and how many are found in production? So I've got one man at the back. So a room of 50 people and only one person says, yeah, we know what a defect leakage looks like. 2 people, yeah, brilliant. Okay, we're making progress. Now, the issue here is that defect leakage is really, really easy to calculate. But the very word defect leakage has got negative connotations. What you talk to your stakeholders about is how many defects we leaked into production. That's not very sensible when you're trying to market your capability and your competence. So what we did was, first of all, we took our defect leakage and we turned it around and called it test effectiveness. So what we were able to show by putting our defect leakage numbers into a run chart was, on average across all of our monthly releases, we were finding 99.4% of all defects that were found during testing and in production. So only 0.6 of the defects that were being found in operations escaped. And what we were able to talk to them about was the level of protection that testing provided them with to keep the operational environment safe and keep it reliable and keep it resilient. And we were able to talk about this level of exposure. So the first thing we could do was actually send some positive messages about how good we were. And when it came to talking about the differing risk appetites, because they were in the governance meetings and they understood our approaches and they understood the constraints we were working with, we could say, we know how much it costs to fix these defects post-go live. If we needed to prevent those pre-go live, this is how much more money it would cost. So we could start to broker an intelligent business conversation about risk appetite and the commercial benefits of actually trying to close the risk gap or maybe open it further and save a lot more money. The relationship with ops at the time was still quite raw. There was still a lot of heat and corporate memory that was giving the head of ops trouble with this. So I engaged the CIO, because testing reported into the CIO, so did ops. So I used the CIO as a broker. And the way I had the conversation with him, he was a pretty good guy. He was a bit grumpy at times, but overall he was fairly reasonable. I said, do you know the industry average in financial services that banks have for defect leakage or test effectiveness? He said, no, I don't. I said, well, it's somewhere about 95, 96%. I said, do you know what we're running at? He said, no. I said, we're running at 99.4. And he nearly fell off his chair. And he picked up the report and he said, I'm going to go and talk to the board and tell them how good we are. So suddenly, by using data the right way, we had the CIO as an advocate, and he was able to go to operations and say, you know that little gap there, you've got to live with that, because it's already exemplary, and we can't afford to spend more money unnecessarily closing that gap because it is not value for money. And because the regulator has to report into the National Audit Office, that was a good conversation that he could have with them. So by using data, by expressing it in a way that was different, by using some positive language instead of negative language, we were able to turn that perception around. And it took a few months, but by the time I left that role as a head of testing at the FCA, operations were sweet as kittens in a basket. They loved us, and we had a very harmonious relationship with them. And that's pretty much the talk. I don't think I've got anything else to say unless anybody has got any questions or concerns or wants some clarification, so I'm happy to spend some time. So I'll just pass you the mic. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I'm quite interested to know the number of test cases that you people had, because the result 99.4%, it's quite impressive, but how much were the number of test cases?
So I can't tell you the exact number of test cases because this is, oh, sorry, 1 second. This is an aggregated view per month. So in this particular month, we had this level of effectiveness, but that was a roll-up of maybe 30 to 40 different projects that were running. So it was an aggregated view. Test cases, I can't tell you, I can't remember, to be honest with you. But like I said, we had around 250 people doing testing at any one time. So the size of the team was quite big. Therefore, the volume of testing that we were executing on a monthly basis was quite high as well. Test cases, when it comes to talking to stakeholders, don't really mean very much. They want to know that testing's good and there aren't defects, or if there are defects, why they're there and how we're going to prevent them in the future. Talking about the number of test cases to some stakeholders isn't the right information to talk about, but some it is. Don't get me wrong. If you're on a relationship with a supplier and you pay them by the test case, which some people do, your procurement teams, your supply management teams might want to know how many test cases are being created and executed as a measure of productivity. But for this particular stakeholder group, that wasn't the exam question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fine. But actually, I raised this question, like, for example, if we are working with 1,400 tests, and sometimes we can reduce the failure success, and our the level of protection also reach to 95, 96%. But yeah, that was I interested. It always, for me, it depended on the number of test suits, test cases that we have. That's why that specific question interested me.
No, I get it, and it's fine. And thanks for the
much.
question. The other thing that's kind of worth bearing in mind is when I mentioned we had 5 suppliers working on our behalf, all of them had been incumbent with us for a good 3 to 4 years. So they knew our systems well. We'd been working with them to maintain the testing assets so they were efficient, so there's maximum coverage with minimal number of tests, and things highly automated, of course. So we weren't really able to talk about the test cases, but that's why we were able to get the level of protection so high, because of that familiarity with our systems and our development processes. And our suppliers were very good at keeping good people on our account. Sometimes, unfortunately, when you work in an organisation and you've got suppliers doing testing for you, they'll put good people on account for 6 months, but then move them off to help impress a new account. We were lucky; we were, #1 government agency, so we had the, I suppose, the gravitas to almost mandate that we kept those good people on the account to keep the IP in the organisation and keep us looking good. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, great. Any other questions?
So I'm wondering, what do you think makes testers better at understanding stakeholders? I will just tell you a personal opinion, is to make them stakeholders. So in our company, every tester is expected to own their own project, basically, and be responsible for that overall. Of course, in bigger organizations, it's pretty hard to make everyone a stakeholder. But what is your opinion? How would you make them stakeholders or better at understanding stakeholders?
So the first thing is the identification. And actually, sometimes stakeholders are hidden from us. If we work as testers on a product within a product team, there may be a whole bunch of people in the business that we don't have visibility of because the relationships are managed either through the product owner, or a product director, for example. So sometimes those stakeholders are a bit hidden. But what we need to do is actually work out who they are. So when we do a stakeholder mapping exercise, it isn't something we can necessarily complete on our own. We often have to ask the more senior people in organisations, who are we working on behalf of? And actually sometimes getting hold of a risk register is a really powerful thing, because if you can suddenly see who's got responsibility and accountability to look after the mitigation and reduction of certain risks, and it's anything to do with operational resilience or reliability or availability or usability or security, and we're doing testing in that respect, they're a stakeholder. So the mapping is the first thing to do. And you won't always know if you got there, but you have to have a pretty good stab at it and say, does it feel right? And then once you have done that, you've got to talk to them. And, somehow brokering, the conversations with senior people in business or senior people in the C-suite in IT can be hard. Getting airtime with them is difficult, but you need advocates in your team who can help you do that. And you need to say, right, you're carrying this risk. We're testing, which is a mitigating activity against that risk. What is it you'd like to know from us to make you feel confident that the right things are happening? And ask them the question. And that's why I said the things I put up here were illustrative, because different stakeholders will have different needs and different ways they want information to be presented to them, but you're only going to find out by talking to them. So that's why I said at the beginning, it's a communication business. We've got to talk to them. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay, cool. Okay, any more? I think we're done. Attila, have we got 2 minutes? Because Fiona was nodding furiously about data not being shared appropriately because of different agendas in organisations. Can you share your story or share your thoughts on that? Okay.
I think it's very common for the idea to come up that testing is holding up development. Mm-hmm. It's less common among program managers and project managers, but it's very common among development managers. And as somebody who worked on troubled projects, now, there are a lot of things about troubled projects. One of them is that the quality is abysmal. That's one of the main reasons they're troubled. They're also typically under budgeted and certainly going over budget and over time. So development managers are under a huge amount of pressure, as are test managers.
Yep.
And it's whose story gets in first to some extent. But program managers and project managers are typically recruited from the development side, not from the testing side.
Sure.
And so they are more sympathetic to a view that comes from development. So you, for sure, have to demonstrate value. You have to keep them in the picture. You have to make sure they understand what you're doing and what the value is.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but you were nodding vigorously, so I just wanted you to have a voice. And it underscores what I was saying. So please take it as advice and act on it if you need to. I think
it's a good advice. We shouldn't stop here. I tell you why. I think everyone should do this. Do the stakeholder mapping, know who your stakeholders are, what they need, and deliver the right message. I think it's important because you said it's important because you might deliver something negative, but I think it's good if you kind of spread the good news, build your reputation. We did achieve something. So let's talk about this. I think it's important for everyone. It's, I think, under any circumstances, if you would like to be successful, right? It doesn't matter if it's after testing at home, with your friend. Know your stakeholders, know what they expect, and knowing that it's your responsibility that they understand you, right? That's what you wanted to say.
Mm-hmm. You summarised my talk in 30 seconds.
Sorry.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Mike, I'd like to add one thing.
Yeah.
And that is know your allies.
True. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You need your advocates.
Power in an organization doesn't always reside exactly according to the official hierarchy or the organization chart. It's a very good thing to do a little sitting back and understanding who has whose ear and who cares about testing and wants to make sure it's done properly and make sure they understand. Because although they may not be themselves the CTO, they may be the CTO's golf buddy.
Yeah. You're talking about who's influential.
Yes, who is influential, exactly.
Making, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I do agree with you, and I didn't really go on about advocacy there because, again, it's another angle. But, yeah, you're right. I mean, some of the most influential people I've seen in organisations are the enterprise architects, especially when it comes to saying yes for tools or yes for environments or yes for anything different that needs to be done that has got anything security-related or technology-related. Enterprise architects hold the key. So you've got to get on the right side of those guys. So I think that's just an example to underscore what you said.
Yep, it was a great talk. Any other questions? Because I think it's a good one. Trust me, this is the most important thing you have to learn in your career. Trust me, because there's a very thin line between being successful, being accepted, or being the bad guy, right? Mm-hmm. It's true. And it's on you. If you know who you talk to, who you need to talk to, who you need to convince, and if you do it the right way, you might be successful. Otherwise, might not be. Thanks, Fiona. Actually, she's one of our keynote speakers. I'm glad to have her here. Thanks for the talk.
You're welcome. Good stuff.
Loved it.
So,
inspiring.
Good, I'm glad. Thank you.
Okay. We are going to switch laptops because our next speaker is Alex.